Well, welcome to another episode of Lighting the Candle, a world that works. And I'll tell you what, we are in the midst of all sorts of different cool things that are working really, really well, and some other things that are working not so well, and some other things that are just plain not working. I mean, how can you say, that when two countries are at war and 25 or 30 other countries are involved in it, that's working? I'm not sure that any of us would buy into that. So we're not going to talk about any of that sort of stuff. But what I think might be valuable for us to talk about today, and oh, by the way, before I forget, I'm Bill Carell, and we have been doing this for just under 2 years now, and we have, I think, north of 107 episodes in the can. Thanks for listening to us. We do this all for you, and we do it for us too. We kind of like enjoy getting together and having these conversations and letting things go and letting things kind of percolate. And hopefully, you'll find some areas that'll make you think a little bit and maybe bring you to some questions and what have you. And if not, I hope it's at least entertaining. Yeah, we can shoot for that, right? Right, ladies?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So let me introduce my co-hosts. I've got Lisa Sheehan, longtime buddy, and was on the inaugural call way back when, episode number one. And then also Jan Jeremias, who is now becoming a fast favorite, frequent flyer. Yeah, for all
Absolutely.
you alliteration junkies out there. So the really cool thing about what we do is out of nothing, we choose a topic every single week. And um, in the conversation, we'll do our best to try to throw some definitions together, some scenarios in life, and then share ideas with each other, and hopefully edify each other in terms of things that we haven't thought of before. And every once in a while, some magic happens and something completely new comes out. So I'm always up for that. That's kind of fun. So with that said, if we were going to have a conversation about communication, we could have it at many different levels. So do you want to talk about communication today?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So there's our communication, like you and me, our communication to each other, the words that we use, the assumption that when one speaks, that the other person shares the uh, at least the definition, if not necessarily the feeling of a particular word, right? And if that's so, when those things match up, you have this really profound thing called communication. There are other opportunities where we use words that might not necessarily be common, to the other person. And in many cases, people don't bother to slow down and ask someone to define what they're saying or say more about it because it seems to be a little uncomfortable, right? Especially when somebody goes, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Yeah. They're looking for validation, to their idea, not necessarily whether or not you heard them or you understand. So I think the funny part of it is that if you and I, Lisa, have a conversation, what are our roles? What are the roles that we play?
I mean, because we met in a networking situation, so I mean, we've learned how to play better, let's so to speak. So we definitely listen with the intent to hear. So, and then I think weigh it better than. And if you said something I didn't know what you meant, I would definitely ask you. I mean, because we have that kind of relationship conversationally, so
Yeah, you often said things that I didn't understand, and I had to get clarification. Because if we were going to draw a Venn diagram with our circles intersecting, there's this really cool area in the middle where, yeah, we can have that conversation and we will start and finish on the same page. But I would say your area in terms of exploring, the inner being and exploring all these different manifestations of people's mindfulness, different ways of prayerfully looking at a situation. I've learned so much from you in the last probably 2.5 to 4 years. It's been a remarkable journey. So so the real interesting part is that the responsibility that we both have is to speak and listen with a particular intention,
Correct.
which would be different than having a couple of cocktails and just making each other laugh.
I could do that too.
It kind of depends on what the topic is, right?
Yeah, well, about laughing, yes.
Yeah, although there are extraordinary people, no matter what's going on in their lives, they always find a way to laugh about it. It doesn't matter how bad or how good it is. I envy those folks.
Right.
And so, Jan, if we're in a conversation and we have this responsibility to listen and speak in a particular way, are there any cultural rules that are in place? Or are there any mores or faux pas in terms of that type of conversation? Like, let's say that we're meeting each other for the first or the second time. We don't know each other that well.
I mean, I think the few things that come to mind, which I don't know if this is directly relates to your question, is I think one of the things to open communication is realizing that someone could voice an opinion and you don't need to fix anything.
Yeah.
That you just have to step back and listen. That it's not your job to make everything quote unquote okay. And so I think that that's one. And I learn a lot from everybody I'm around now and, different situations. And that is the value of listening. And so, I think no matter where you're from or what your background is listen first and speak second.
Yes. As Covey said, right? Li-
Eh,
Listen to understand.
Yeah, don't listen. And I don't know, but that's what I'm just starting to step back and do a lot more is listen more and think less about what you're going to say in response.
Yeah, and I would say that if we were to go out and play 20 questions with people off of the street and we asked them what the responsibilities were today in terms of having conversations with people, are there any rules? I think compared to even the 1960s and 70s, it would be quite a different list. You know what I mean? But I was always raised with um, tell the truth, you know, before all else, be truthful, in every way that you possibly can, because your credibility, it can take a long time to build up and it can be gone in an instant. And I think whenever somebody smells a phony, you're not having an important conversation after that occurs. They're not listening to you any longer. They're actually suspicious of the next things that come out of your mouth, in my opinion. So, how about decorum? The whole common courtesy sort of thing that I don't know. And I'm finding it more difficult to find in a common way, but we used to, operate on the golden rule: treat people as you'd like to be treated, right?
Well, I'm reminded of the gates of speech. Have you ever heard the three gates of speech?
I have. Please say some more.
Um, which is one, um, ask yourself, is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And, you know, how would that color a conversation? Or just even, to be able to listen in that way, you know, listen with kindness and understanding
Yeah.
and, listen like as if you were the other person in a way, because to them that's true. Like to where they're living, what they're saying is true.
Yeah, that's where the curious mind comes up with questions as opposed to judgments.
Hmm.
So if you think about it for a minute, um, when it's kind of interesting because when you're listening, you're not just listening to the other person speak. I say it's also important to listen to yourself listen. When you hear those automatic triggered responses, the thought that you have that you didn't get a vote on, it just showed up, and now you're interested in that more than the person that's speaking to you. That's something to learn from. That's something to take note of and just say, that's kind of interesting. And yeah, it definitely works. Fires like a trigger, doesn't it?
I mean, those kind of responses to me, they're reflexive. They're so automatic that sometimes it's almost like they just pop in and you're like, it's almost like shocking or like a surprise. It's like, oh my gosh, here that is,
Yeah.
But also there's other forms of communication. And as you were talking about communicating, I'm thinking about, facial expressions and tone and all the other ways that people communicate with each other that are not words. And so that's what I was thinking of also, is
Yeah.
how we communicate in other ways.
And you stop and think about it, mastery in all of those areas makes you a damn good stand-up comedian, you know?
I'm
And
thinking the communication or the lack thereof, especially in person, how technology has changed our level. Because I've noticed it even amongst coworkers that I used to call up and joke with and then ask the question that I needed, business wise. And there was a camaraderie between us, and that's completely gone. I mean, the same woman that I had these, you know, conversations with, it's like forgotten now, and it's all just business. There's no, you know, here's where you get that answer or kind of thing, and so we've lost that level of communication, that person to person communication instead of a type to type letter communication.
Well, I mean, I think texting has taken away, look how, texting or those kind of messages and how that has like taken away from communication. Because when we talk about civility or cordial or just common decency kind of thing, all that kind of goes out the window. Because every now and then I'll send a text and I'll think to myself, oh my gosh, I didn't even say hello,
Right.
I didn't say how are you, it was just my brain was thinking and I just typed it. And then I've gone back afterwards saying, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, how are you? Like, or what's new, but it's, it becomes, but I think that we recognize it. There are a lot of people out there, and I don't mean to, that don't see it that way. And that's to me where we kind of need to shift and
yeah,
train ourselves to go back and start to think about those things again.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, what's really kind of interesting, when you think about the word communication, most people have a superficial definition of that, which is where I talk and you listen, and then you talk and I listen. And that actually translates a little bit more authentically into you make noise and I be silent, I make noise and you be silent. And we take turns and we try to ethically share it evenly so that I'm waiting for my turn to make noise and then you're done making your noise. So I'll now make my noise and so forth and on it goes, right? And there's not necessarily any sort of transference of anything, any emotion, any intent, any intellectual property. And it's quite different, in the computer world. We have uh, maybe a dozen different communication protocols, with different types of packets that have to get transferred back and forth between, different types of routers and computers and telephones and all that sort of thing. But it's a pretty remarkable process, and when people are trained how to have conversations in this way, it makes it easier for them. And they have what's called a half duplex and a full duplex protocol, right? And the half duplex is I just send stuff to you, and you don't have to give me back anything other than you received the packet. Now that's how human beings typically talk to each other, especially if someone's talking for a while. The other person has to drift off and be thinking about other things. Like right now, you at home. He's droning on, and I have to be thinking about something else because it's kind of hard to follow. But see, there's another type of communication which is full duplex. And I say to you, Lisa, I'm now going to say a sentence to you, and your responsibility is to say that sentence back to me. Okay? Do you want to
Okay.
play? So,
Okay.
the red fox is really funny when he's laughing.
The red box is really funny when he's laughing.
Right. Thank you very much. I know that now that you got what I sent. And that's how computers work, but it happens very quickly. Now, human beings that are well trained in terms of communication do something similar like that. And they use things like, so you mean, and here's what I think you said. And, that's very interesting to me. And here's what I'm taking away. Is this what you meant for me to understand? We do that, with a little bit more aplomb, and that keeps the conversation from being, just this series of repeating things back to each other. But there's a technique called recreation, and that is where you and I say something to each other, and then the other person affirms that the message was received before embarking on the next sentence. So when I say the next thing that I say, Jan, would you say, I understand that, and that's interesting? The red fox is really funny when he's laughing.
I understand. That's interesting.
Okay. So now you are taking a pause and you have an opportunity to actually hear what got said while you're speaking, right?
Mhm.
And it might even seem funny to say, I understand, and thank you, or some other enjoinder like that. And at the same time, it allows for that part of the communication to be fully received. So most people are just, it's more like bar talk than it is, like, let's build something together. You know what I mean? Those are kind of different conversations. My favorite meme for this week is sit with the warriors. The conversation's different.
Sit with the warriors.
Sit with the warriors. The conversation is different.
Say more.
That's up for the interpretation of the listener and the viewer. What is it about if you're a warrior, you know exactly what that means. No time for nonsense, no time for games. It's all about mission. It's all about, what the process and project is, and also how can you and I be a teammate to each other. That's my interpretation of that meme. Now, that might not be somebody else's interpretation. It might not even be the meme author's interpretation. But there's an opportunity in that statement for everyone to find an interpretation that fits them. So if I said to you, sit with the warriors, the conversation is different, how do you hear that?
I don't. You're right. I mean, warrior's a interpretive word. I see warlike people. Strength and purpose, singular purpose almost. Not I don't. It could be. I mean, I could see it's a strong communication circle, and there's going to be no BS kind of thing. You're just going to have to sit with the people that know how to do this and listen, kind of thing, and then follow suit. That you all get a chance. All the warriors get to speak.
Say the phrase again, Bill.
Sit with the warriors, the conversation is different.
See, and I look at it as being totally different because I look at warrior very much the yogic way of looking at a warrior, which is really yourself and all the aspects of yourself. So I look at it as sit with all the aspects of yourself and then read the second half of the sentence. Sit with the warriors. And what was the second half?
The conversation is different.
Right. And if you are totally within yourself with all the aspects, then the conversation's a different conversation than if you're leading from the external.
I like that too because spiritual warriors, takes on a
Right,
whole different
exactly.
level. So if I'm the spiritual warrior, I'm using the highest part of myself to
That's right.
look at
And
the situation.
that's where I took it to. Yeah.
So see, this is where communication starts to occur.
Mhm.
And the neat part of it is that it's not important to the conversation that you understand what I'm sending you after you've received what I sent you in your terms. What's really important is what do you have to add to the conversation, to make it fuller, richer, more meaningful, memorable, right? So those things, and Lisa, I heard you say earlier that with technology, sometimes it's a little bit more difficult, or it seems to be hard, or sometimes not possible to create the kind of relatedness that you used to when it was just a telephone call or meetings face to face, right?
Right.
So it's still possible, I say, and I think it's worth learning how to get good at. And the whole notion of well, 20 years ago, it was I always coached people that it was a bad idea to send emails about a highly sensitive subject that had emotional implications, right? Because the text word is really poor at conveying emotion. You need to do that either, in person or on the telephone, and be ready to immediately answer questions about what do you mean by that, Bill? That sort of thing. But that's where they came in with emoticons, and we went back to Sanskrit and the Egyptians and all that cool thing, you know. So when you think about um, the whole notion of communication, it makes sense, to use whatever tools that you have at your hands, and again, being a warrior in communication, for example, would be there's no rules. Just make sure that the conversation that you have is one that doesn't spoil the silence.
'Cause what's that saying? What's the saying that pertains to that about if you're going to speak, don't let it something. Oh, I'll never forget it.
It has something to do with when you speak, or be silent unless what you're going to say is going to improve on the silence. That's what I remember. And I am totally subject to annotation, modification, upgrading, simply because that's a lot more fun, in my opinion. You and I can sit here and we can bat quotes back and forth all day long. And you know me, I am the least worried person about getting that part right of anybody you'll ever meet. No footnotes in any of the work that I do. My
Right.
thoughts come to me in a minute, and I don't attribute them to anybody because I, they didn't ask me to vote on it when I decided to have their ideas stick around. So you stop and think about, the whole notion of well, I think it's a different thing if you're going to claim an idea as your own and get paid for it. I think that's quite a different thing. But just in conversation with human beings, and increasing the breadth of a particular conversation, it makes an awful lot of sense to use whatever tools you've got in the bag, including emoticons and emojis and all that sort of thing. I'm just really starting to get into. I use probably about a dozen different emojis pretty regularly, And for instance, I'm one of those crackpots. Somewhere along the way, I noticed on Facebook, there's the thumbs up like that everybody does because it's appropriate. And I said, man, there's a heart over here. I noticed it didn't cost any more to use the heart. And so it got to be my routine rather than a thumbs up, to do the heart, right? And now I find that there's other men that are friends of mine and have been for years that are now also using hearts instead of thumbs up.
Wow.
Our masculinity is not at risk.
That's right.
Real men eat quiche.
Right.
Always have, always will, and yum.
Yeah.
Now let's get into the different kinds of quiche. What's your favorite?
Oh God, there's I like them all. I mean, the first one was quiche Lorraine, so I kind of like that one. It's a standard, but you could throw anything in a bunch of eggs and cheese, cream, and make it work.
Yeah. First time I ever had quiche
Sorry,
Lorraine.
you have to add, and you have to have butter.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
no, I mean,
There has to be butter.
buttery
So-
crust. Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And butter makes everything better, I got to say. Butter, there is nothing in the world that butter and bacon can't fix.
Do that.
So the first time I ever had quiche Lorraine, it was in high school French class, probably 10th grade, and everybody took on a different French, uh, dish to make, right? And so Shannon Johnson brought in quiche Lorraine, and of course I went home and I decided I was going to give myself a really cool one, that I was certain that everybody was going to like, and I decided to do cream puffs. So it called for a particular kind of oil, and we didn't have that at my house, and we didn't necessarily, roll in the dough back in those days. And my mom had some lard,
Yeah,
and she said, "Here, try this." So I made these cream puffs lovingly, and I put them, hot and everything, and I stuffed them with the cream and all the rest of that stuff. And I take them to class in a brown paper bag. And if you have any experience with lard at all, after it starts to get to room temperature and then solidifies again, before it does that, it does this really neat thing, which is to leach out into all of the brown paper bag and make it look god awful. And that's what I walked into my French class with. And of course, they didn't taste all that great either, because turns out there's a big difference between lard and a particular kind of oil. So,
lesson learned.
but the quiche that Shannon Johnson was awesome. And so on every cruise, um, so all right, let's get into the distinctions of quiche for a moment in different languages. So you're familiar with frittata,
Yes.
and what would you say are the major similarities and differences between quiche and frittata?
My frittata doesn't have a crust.
Is it necessary for quiche to have a crust, do you think?
Mm-mm.
I've made a crustless quiche as well, but and my frittata doesn't have as much cheese at all.
Right?
It barely any.
What kind of cheese do you use in your quiche?
Well, the Swiss cheese is the number one, and one of the number ones in the quiche Lorraine. So it could be a combination of Swiss and cheddar. I mean, but definitely multi cheese.
Yep. With camembert and that and Gouda and that sort of thing?
It could be any. Yeah, I mean, I know my quiche Lorraine was basically Swiss and I think cheddar. I haven't made one in forever, but
Yeah. So if you're on a diet at home, you might not want to listen for the next few minutes, because I'm getting hungry just talking about this. So that's neat. And then what kind of seasonings would you find in a quiche Lorraine or in a frittata that you might not find in a quiche Lorraine?
me personally, I probably put more seasonings in my frittata than like the quiche Lorraine has bacon, so it's salt.
My frittata does too.
Well, yeah, it could. I mean, frittata to me, whatever vegetables left in the fridge, combine it with eggs and a little bit of cream and pop it in the oven. Let it pop up, rise up, and fall.
And I like to fold the cheese in, and then I use stuff like jalapeno, peppers and that sort of thing. So Jan, are you being quiet because we're not letting you get a word in edgewise, or
No, no, because first of all, I'm a vegetarian and now a vegan. So I don't really have a whole lot to share with this topic. One is bacon, which, I haven't eaten it in 30 years. So, I've never eaten bacon anyway, but like just, I haven't eaten meat in 30 years. So I'm just like, okay. And now a vegan. So I'm now dairy free. So that's, you know,
yeah, I'm
and
wondering, would there be some, like a tofu quiche or something of that
Yeah,
nature?
I haven't been explored those of late because I haven't been well, I'm really not a vegan because I eat eggs, so it's really dairy free, and gluten free. So,
Yeah.
so now I'm kind of navigating that world. Not to say to me when I used to make quiche, it was kind of like what Lisa described as a frittata. It was like whatever veggies were left over went in the quiche, So if I had broccoli or spinach or, some other veggies, those always went in. And to me, one of my favorite things in anything, because I'm a big mushroom person, is everything has to have mushrooms. So if I'm doing a frittata, if I'm doing a quiche, it all has to have mushrooms. So that's like one of my favorite things to combine into, because to me, mushrooms and cheese, like you don't get any better.
Agreed. Yeah.
So
And those of us that are not vegan, if you can throw a little, thinly sliced, steak on there too, that's not too shabby. Not too shabby at all. So I think what we were just doing was communicating.
right.
So there's three different levels. So the professor is going back into his mode again.
Mhm.
So and all kidding aside, it's kind of interesting to step back and look at the dynamics of communicating as opposed to sharing thoughts or having a dialogue, or which really most people do as a monologue, right? I entertain you for a little while, then you entertain me. Now that's the worst case model that I'm presencing. But if you think about it, there are three different levels for communication to take place at. And being a computer guy, it's absolutely the same thing for communications in computers as well. Three different levels of communication going on at the same time. But with us, there's the auditory, word and language. There's also the sensual part of it, which is the vision and hearing and what have you. And then there is the emotional side, which is like the gut to gut conversation. So that when we were cutting up a little bit about being vegan or not being vegan, and then mushrooms, and no, that communicates, right? But it also communicates at a level that's far beyond, just hearing the words being spoken. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think that's interesting about our whole just communication. One is even within the differences, we found common ground.
Hmm.
And so when you think about communication and that containing the word common, almost like come together, and then the same thing with community, is fine, and so that feeling of like even within like, okay, well, I'm a vegan and you eat meat or whatever, we did find that common mushroom within within everything to say, okay, well, we all get that. We all were like, yeah, 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 so we found that common place to kind of merge.
Yeah, agreed. I only have three kinds of mushrooms in my house at all times. So I think the main thought here, if there is one, is a question, and the question is what is it that makes communication enjoyable?
Could you really label that? I mean,
Well, let
not
me ask
everybody
you a que-
is it.
let me ask you this question then. If you have that question, have you ever been in a conversation with somebody who was clear that all they were interested in doing was making points and somehow winning?
Well, that was going to kind of play on my response was maybe we should look at what makes a conversation or communication uncomfortable. And that was, and so the reverse. So, was what you just said, is if you're in a conversation where you feel like all they're interested is voicing their own side and they're totally not interested in hearing how I view anything.
Yeah, it's always kind of a downer to me to be called a name. When I mean, my answer to that, whenever I'm in a conversation with somebody and they call me a name, my answer to that is it's pretty clear that you have, no interest in taking this conversation further. I'm all done if you are. Do you know how many times people will put it in reverse and back up and say, sorry, I didn't mean what I think you heard, or whatever. But they'll say, let me try it this way. Being a stand-up adult and making a choice to stay in the conversation or walk away, that's not a bad way to look at being here. I mean, you've got the choice between throwing a punch or not. Why not behave in the same manner with somebody who is obviously not following the rules of engagement in terms of, common courtesy and things of that nature? You can always say, I'm done here. I'm more than happy to talk to you on another occasion, but we're getting nowhere fast. And, this is, 15 minutes of my life I'll never get back.
I think it's also understanding when you are, let's say, up for the task and not up for the task. Because I think that's, there are times when you look and you're thinking to yourself that I'm not in the right place for this conversation today.
Right.
And just honoring that and saying, even saying to the person, can we have this discussion, or can we have this exchange at another time? Because right now, whatever, and you can fill in the blank however you want to fill in the blank. But I think it's sometimes actually honoring that, because sometimes we're not in a place where we can really, when we're open to communicating.
Yeah. Or open to being open to communicating.
That's right.
What a powerful way to look at life, like a responsible human being, that what happens next is up to me. I mean, I'm going to be partner in this and take responsibility for what works and doesn't work about it, which basically means when you and I have a conversation, we're never going to finish that conversation with either one of us walking away angry. We're going to have an agreement, to say, look, we're not making a love connection here today. So how about we give it a shot at another time?
And
There's
not,
always
and
that.
yeah, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Oh no, well, I probably might take you off topic a little bit. No, it's because I was going to say that there's always the classic redirecting, because I'm talking when there's like more than 4 people in a conversation and it's not going well. And I love to redirect. So that's one of my go-to
Give us
defenses.
an example, please.
An example? Oh, it was definitely a borderline political conversation, and I knew the sides were opposing. So they were talking about listening to different podcasters, or trying to get the other person to expand their viewpoints by listening to a different podcaster. So I just brought up yet another podcaster, and that brought up a whole new conversation.
Now that's called going outside the lines by coloring inside the lines. I like it.
Yeah.
It's kind of it also is interesting to me to watch people set other people up.
Mm.
So I was out for cocktails several months ago, and I'm sitting there. I'm talking to the person um, whose husband was up, getting IPAs for us, and she said, "Whatever you do, do not bring up climate change. Just don't bring it up." And
Yeah.
I said, done. Okay, I'm going to use one of my president's favorite technical terms. The husband comes back, he sits back down, and son of a bitch, she says, "Hun, what do you think about climate change?" What? Really? No, don't go there. No, come back. It was off the rails in 5 minutes. I never got to speak, but he knew exactly what was going to come out of my mouth before I said anything at all. And I finally just said, "What can we talk about?"
See, yeah.
And this is one of these things where I've known the person for years. We've never had that kind of conversation before, but it obviously was something that was very important to him and not very open-minded about, another opinion on this subject. But I felt totally betrayed, by "Don't you dare." And then it was like this little look, and then, "Hon, what do you think about climate change?" And it's, "Oh my God. No place to run, no place to hide. I've got a whole beer to drink here." I've never walked away from a whole beer, okay? I'm just saying.
That's alcohol abuse.
No, that wouldn't be me at all, would it, Lisa? So what other kinds of people would you not wanna be in conversation with?
That same group of people they're the type that love their family loves to get into these heated battles basically.
Right.
And we know that about them. So and I don't we were not raised that way. So we have a harder time with it and but since those conversations are so much more prevalent now, you have to get used to them and be able to hold your own in all of them. But I prefer not to have that kind of person that's just egging people on to get a rise out of people.
So, if Ken were here, I'm going out on a ledge for a moment, and I'm going to presence his Caputo-ness. If Ken were here, he would say, "That's easy for me. I just walk away."
Well,
You know?
I've walked away in a conversation
Yeah,
when, and I think that, uh, in a conversation where you have a feeling that you're gonna be ganged up on, you know, or you're gonna be the minority amongst, like, let's say the only person with an opinion versus one opinion versus everyone else
right.
that doesn't share that opinion, I've literally made an excuse to leave because I'm like, this is not a place that I would really like to be right now. So
So
I think that, I might say that, that's another option. If that's you, I mean, some people might be fine with that, but I'm like, it's okay, you
well, I'll
know.
tell you what, it would depend a lot on the dynamics of the conversation, say. So, for instance, if you're in a group of people that will thoughtfully at least be quiet while you're expressing your opinion, and then will actually address what it is that you've said and shared, and they don't agree with me, I mean, I'm in that conversation all day long. I don't have a problem with that. But where I hear Lisa and you coming from is where the people are antagonistic, probably talking over you, ganging up two or three at a time, and yeah, that's right, and did you know this, and not allowing you to actually speak, like that unfortunate situation. I think I had half my beer gone by the time he was done with his diatribe. But see, that's the other thing is that the art of persuasion is one in which it's very emotional, and it also has to do with being likable, while you're making your case. I think lawyers use that approach an awful lot, especially, where they're in a trial where there's a jury and there's a lot at stake. It's important for the lawyer, in my opinion, to be likable and to be appropriate, with emotional boundaries with the jury, and not take these liberties of doing things that make people upset while they're sitting in their box and have no place to run to. And I use kind of like that metaphor, in a situation, especially where there's something that's happened in a group and someone has done something totally inappropriate. and there needs to be some sort of corrective action taken. And the first thing is to get everybody's attention and get them calmed down to the point where you can go one at a time. You say what you got to say. And I would take all four of those disagreeers and I'd listen to each one of them individually and I would go last. And I would say before I got started, I listened to everything that you had to say, each one of you one at a time. Will you pay me the same respect? So like raising the bar in terms of, what's going to be acceptable behavior in this conversation. I don't see people doing that an awful lot. I mean, mostly it's about talking louder than the other person. And then later on, when they say, you're really obnoxious, and then they say, well, no, I'm just passionate. Being passionate allows you to do any damn thing that you want to. And at the end of the day, you've got this get out of jail card that says, I'm passionate. And no friends. So how do you, those things that we were talking about earlier that immediately communicate with people? It's like teenagers. We all know what they're like. You try doing that in a room full of people that have actually had teenagers, you get laughing. Or mother-in-laws in a room full of guys. Although I have to tell you, my mother-in-law practically walked on water. One of the neatest women that I've ever had the privilege to spend time with. She lived with me for 13 years. You want to talk about no place to hide? She definitely made me a better person. So, what are some other things about communication that we haven't touched on yet?
Actually, my friends and I were just talking about like the type of communication you learn, especially from your parents, and how we, well, as most people discover and are horrified to do so, is that you communicate this, the same way as your mother, or you end up being that same way of listening and talking as your mother often, or your parents, either one of your parents. Some people are very motherly when they speak, and so because that's how their mother was, and some people are very strident when they speak and to the point, that kind. So, I think then you develop your own kind of offshoot of that, but
Yeah.
there's a basis there that you learn.
So, why communicate?
To me, it's a joy and a way to learn, and like almost your privilege to be able to move about this world, being a human being, and using that to the best of your ability. I mean,
Yeah.
I find conversations, I mean, I get such a kick out of talking to new people and finding out about people. I mean, I know not everybody is that way, and but it's a practice that I love to do. So, and I think that's a good word, as a practice too. It's a practice to learn how to do it, and then the different levels of, you know, learning how to, Parker Palmer's circle of trust, where you can't you speak. Everybody has a time to speak, and there's no fixing, saving, or advising. There's none of that, and there's always open-ended questions. There's not just yes or no questions.
What's Tonka saying?
I got communicating, and I was thinking that, to me, the purpose of, like, one of the purposes of communication is to expand, and that's the only word I can use. Like, to expand as a human being, or to expand ideas. Because to me, we're, and I'm using the word limited, but not in a negative way. Like, we're limited in our scope. And to communicate to me is a way to you learn more for the potential of things improving or things getting better or you know so that's the way I think of communication or one
Yeah.
of the ways.
Yeah. The essence of communication is conversation. And unfortunately, I was raised during, I won't speak for you, but I was raised during a period of time where people were taught that thinking for themselves meant go away and think, and then come back and tell people what you want to do. And usually the outcome from thinking, things over and thinking for yourself, unless there was another conversation that you had to stand up and perform for, there was no difference made in the thinking by yourself. All the difference takes place in the conversation with someone else. And life is all about, and it's all a conversation, it's all like, for instance, we were talking earlier, about, getting information. And we've spent this whole time talking about person to person, and personal communication between you and me. Uh, but if we were talking about one to many, like, getting the word out in media and that sort of thing, it all comes down to this whole notion of, um, again, as you said, expanding, Jan, and the aspect of it that's about learning and growing and having fun at it. Um, somebody told me when I was in my 20s two things. One is they told me that my brain would not stop be fully grown until I was 25 years old, thereabouts. They said biology tells us, science, right? And then they also said, when you learn things, there's this remarkable thing that happens to your brain. It puts wrinkles into it. Now, I don't know if that is a scientific fact or not, okay? But I've always used that. I've always thought it was a really great metaphor, kind of like the wrinkles on a 90-year-old woman's face, each one of them having, being a reference to a particular story in her life. And the wrinkles, that come in your brain. So I've always thought that it was better to put more wrinkles into my brain and learn something new every day if possible, than to just be comfortable, or comfortably numb, like Pink Floyd says, with whatever state of being that I'm in today, and try to maintain, that state of being. I've always felt like if you're staying in the same place, you're really falling backwards. And that way of looking at things has also, made it possible for me to remember when I do to be curious about things. But when I remember to be curious about things most? When I'm talking to other people. When I'm talking to you.
I was just thinking that there are, I mean, other forms of communication which we have not talked about at all, and that is communication through music or the arts or writing. Um, there are vast ways to communicate.
Oh, yeah. How about touch?
Yeah.
And that right before you said that, Jan, I was thinking to myself because I'm a copywriter by trade, and my whole life has been how to reformulate something so that the common person will get it and want it. Or
I like that better than hearing the words, write it so that a third grader can understand it.
no.
I think we can aspire to more than that, don't you?
Mhm.
I did.
Good for you.
I was thinking about because I went to a workshop on Saturday, and I was thinking about, or well, it's really not. It's a mastermind, so it's not really a workshop. And it was a speaker, and I was thinking of like communication through music and how I guess on some level, like could that be a uniting way to communicate? Because I don't know of someone who doesn't like some form of music and how we could communicate through that versus sometimes communicating through words or just other ways just seems to get caught in our interpretation of what that means.
That's a conversation that could be rich and full of a lot of gold on another day.
Mhm.
The whole notion of what what occurs into the listening and the writing and the playing of music.
Mhm.
And the playing can be as simple as just putting something on your computer, from a file, or the whole idea, the resurgence of vinyl these days, which I think is awesome. Listening to old songs that I haven't listened to in 50 years, some of which go back to the 1940s and early 50s, you know, uh, and how it requires me to place myself in a different time. I don't know if either one of you ever listened to much music from the 1950s.
Some.
Mm.
Yeah. So, stuff like In the Still of the Night.
Mhm.
And there was another one that was really, my dad had this as a 45 out of the service, and I remember listening to it probably when I probably, I don't know, be somewhere between 2 and 5 years old. But it was called The Big Hurt, and what a dramatic song. And it requires me to go back to the way that I heard and thought about it at that point in time. It's transformational, in other words, for me.
Mhm.
So we're going to do a show on music and what's the possibility for the world as far as music is concerned, or whatever else we want to do with music,
Mhm.
communication, the whole 9 yards. So what do we want to do in closing to make this podcast a complete communication for this week? And Lisa, you are struggling over there. Your internet is anyway, but that's okay. Jan and I will fill in until you reestablish your connection. So what do we want to say to be complete, my friend?
Oh. I mean, maybe just to me, it's like, look at how you communicate. Like, maybe, take a moment to think to yourself, as you're communicating or before you communicate, kind of like what you want to, and get out. I don't mean in a negative way, like what's in it for me, but what is the objective of this conversation or this communication? And how do I want to feel once it's over? And what can I do to, because like you say, I mean, we are responsible to, I mean, if we come to a conversation, we're responsible, or communication, we're responsible for half of that or whatever percentage of the people that we are in. So what role do I want to take? And, what's the most positive thing I can bring to that communication?
Right. And I'll tell you what, as a step ladder, to get up to a higher plane, start with what's in it for me. With what's in it for me is to learn something. What's in it for me is to come away with maybe a little different feeling that I had before we started the conversation. I think that's totally appropriate for people, especially if they're struggling to understand why it's even important to be in communication.
Hmm.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily have to start with a curious mind, but imagine what would be possible if everyone got out of bed every single morning and said, I am going to make every single conversation today a learning experience. Speaking of music, I think when we're done, Lisa, we got to set this episode to music because it's been like a Pink Floyd show with you coming and going.
Hmm.
And you're back now.
No, exactly.
So
Right.
we're wrapping up. And what would you like to say, my friend?
Can you? I can't see myself now, so I don't know what I did,
I can see
or any
you.
of you, any of you for that matter. Um, Well, because earlier when we were talking about quotes, it's like one of the quotes, and I'm not going to quote it perfectly, is better to remain quiet than open your and look a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt.
Yes. I can't begin to think of how much damage that has done to corporate meetings over the last 100 years since, was it Twain that said that?
hmm
Yeah. So, you know what? I think take a chance. You're going to look goofy sometimes, okay? Deal with it. Clean it up. Be human,
Yeah.
be real.
Yeah, but just you could throw a funny quote in there like that, and that opens up the conversation too.
Yeah, and the one that I really love is the when you state a fact or a quote, even you could say, I could be wrong because I frequently am. As a matter of fact, I take chances. And at the time I'm taking a chance, it doesn't matter to me if I'm right or wrong, as long as it gets the point made and keeps the conversation growing. Now, I don't know how many people would agree with that, but I don't give a damn. And with that said, I think we have come to the end of our podcast for this week. It's been remarkable with both of you, wonderful human beings, Jan Jeremias, Lisa Sheehan, and Bill Carell. We are signing off and saying thank you for listening. Hope you got as much out of this as we did. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at exvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.